And then I really feel like I got a grace to let it go. Um, and I still we all have our flaws, but you still want to be liked.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, if somebody was coming after me, I could take the hit and say, we're actually on the same page on these things.
Hmm.
We just disagree on the solution, and um, we can move forward by talking about what the data actually show.
Sure.
I mean, the paper that they got all upset about was written for economists. Economists have their ways of speaking about things.
Hmm. And they also tend to like to comment across every other discipline because they feel like their formulas give them the authority to pontificate on all matter of social issue, which I think is funny. I appreciate. I think it's good. Um,
And maybe me more than others, because
yeah.
one
Okay.
of my
Sure.
friends joked that I was the best paid sociologist out there because
Yeah.
I do papers on teen sex, lots of different how people form friendships.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that whole lead theory. I think of lead being the main driver of crime in the '90s and everything. I'm pretty sure that was an economist. I think that was the progenitor of that theory. Yeah. So something that also, just as a heads up, I don't know if I said this. This is I live stream this, so this is live. It's not like cut to and edited later on. So don't say anything
Right.
crazy or whatever. Yeah. One theme that has kind of been consistent over the past couple years, as we analyze kind of universities and how much can you take up a contrary to the, I'll say, woke establishment opinion, is we've noticed that increasingly administrators seem to be unwilling to back faculty, and they kind of like bow to external pressures, or I don't want to say radical students. I feel like Rush Limbaugh. I'm using a lot of conservative buzzwords right now. But
Yeah.
obviously, you're at the center of what is arguably one of the most impassioned debates for school admissions related stuff and for social issues broader in the United States. Do you feel like, as a professor, do you feel like your school has your back? You don't ever feel any pressure or threats from that, or are you kind of like being a little bit more careful now? Yeah. What is your general feeling on that?
Well, I'm certainly careful, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And that protest happened after I already had tenure.
Okay.
So that also helped. I am definitely in the minority. I do
Careful
relative
for
to
that word. I'm just
academia,
kidding.
you know, by definitely a conservative relative to the rest of academia.
Mm-hmm.
And what's been great about being in economics most of the time is that I can still have those, we can have those debates, and I learn a ton. I probably learned so much because, I have to actually defend my positions. There's a guy, Mike Munger, here who argues it's not the conservative students who suffer from the woke establishment universities. It's the liberal students because they never learn how to defend their opinion.
Sure.
Um, but I definitely watch what I say. I thought there would be a lot of backlash in me doing this case. It hasn't happened, you know. And if anything, I feel like I've been saved by some of the other work I did in this case, because as a result of getting to see all of Harvard's admissions data, I wrote papers about their legacy and athlete admissions.
Mm-hmm.
So now they want to say my model is wonderful. Now they want to go after uh, the legacy and athlete admissions, which
Gotcha.
I'm supportive of,
Mm-hmm.
going after those.
Okay, so focusing on affirmative action, I feel like the steelmanned version, the best argument that I've heard in favor of affirmative action is when college admissions are looking at students that they want to enroll. There is a plethora of qualifications and experience that they take into account when they're processing these applications. It might be extracurriculars, might be whether you're a foreign exchange student, whether you're immigrant, whether you're whatever. There's a million things apparently that they'll take into account among like classes and test scores and everything. And affirmative action advocates say that of this mountain of things that are taken into account, it feels like, say you've got two applications and everything is roughly equal, that a student coming from a disadvantaged or unprivileged minority background ought to be weighed a bit heavier than a student coming from a more racially privileged background, I guess. That's like the steelman version of, I think, of affirmative action.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your, yeah, I guess, so what is your like general response? Do you feel like it's bad? like morally and ethically? Do you think that just the pragmatics don't work? Like, yeah, how do you address in like a casual conversation or slightly more than casual conversation? Somebody brings this up. How do you feel about that? Yeah.
Well, so I often take the cop out of saying, that I'm not, taking up a particular side of the affirmative action debate, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm a researcher of affirmative action.
Mm-hmm.
What bugs me about the debate is that people have really strong opinions on it,
Mm-hmm.
and yet at the same time, we have no idea how much it happens. So when you described it as like a tiebreaker,
Mm-hmm.
that's an entirely different thing than like the 𝘗𝘗𝘵𝘵 version of we're going to have a quota system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because universities just hide their data,
Sure.
you can't actually see how much it actually matters.
Mm-hmm.
And it really ties in. The paper that got me into trouble here was using Duke data. That's why there was a protest, because I'm sort of pointing the fingers at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed, and this I think occurs at all college campuses, is like the science and math classes and the economics classes, they're harder. They give lower grades and you study more.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a clear effect on who sticks in those fields. So part of the protest was over a data fact, which was for Black men who start in like the sciences and economics at Duke, over half left for some other major.
Okay.
Only 8% of white men left.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be exploited by differences in their academic background. If you
Mm-hmm.
come in and you're on the low end of SAT math for your school, you're going to be a lot less likely to stick it out. Now, part of what got me in trouble is saying, well, they thought that was victim blaming. Fundamentally, it was the sciences and economics that were a hostile environment. And
Sure.
that's just not true. The legacies with those test scores were leaving at the same rate. Once you account for the differences in academic background,
Mm-hmm.
race didn't matter.
Gotcha.
So for me, I think everyone, I can see the moral argument for saying we're not going to treat people differently based on their race.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're pro affirmative action, I think you need to figure out at what point you think it would go too far.
Mm-hmm.
Now, somebody like 𝘗𝘗𝘵 would say all the way until it's proportional. But then I think you're missing out on the fact that your preparation does matter.
Yeah.
Uh,
Can I
and what you're really trying to get at in terms of diversity.
So something that you're kind of hitting on here, I think in academia, I think this is referred to as mismatch theory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So mismatch theory, especially with UC schools, is what I did reading on, I think a year or two ago, and it flipped my opinion on affirmative action because like you said, one of the frustrating things is for so many of these arguments, the arguments are purely normative or philosophical, and very rarely do we ever actually intersect with the data, which is arguably the most important point. And I think I got an email, I think somebody in my chat typed, like, how do you know if affirmative action is working or whatever? And that was a good question. I was like, I actually don't even know. That's good. Because would we count admissions to a school? Would we count graduation rates? Would we count I'm not actually sure. And then I think the UC schools did a bunch of digging, and you're gonna know this better than me, but I think that what they found was that admissions for Black students was dramatically increased with affirmative action policies, but the absolute rate of graduation stayed the same, and the per capita rate dramatically fell. So whereas you might enroll 20 students, with affirmative action you might enroll 40 students. And if you stop there, affirmative action has been immensely positive. But then when you look at the graduation rate, it's still just those 5 students. Well, now you've got mismatch. But I've also read contrary data that says, well, actually, and now these are papers that I think are more broadly theoretical. I don't know if they get into the numbers, but they make the argument that when you put students in accelerated learning environments, even if they do have some mismatch, just being in those environments benefits that student more than if they would have gone to another school. So broadly speaking, I guess what you were alluding to earlier sounded similar, basically like mismatch theory. Where do you think we're at empirically on, is the idea of mismatch theory true? Is it not accounting for some things, or is it part true, part not? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's clearly true. And it's always a matter of how far would you have to go for it to kick in.
Gotcha.
So, one of the papers, there's a guy named Zach Bleemer who wrote a paper that was saying that Miss Max is sort of off.